Good morning, happy Sabbath. A little quiet. Good morning, happy Sabbath. Amen. I want to start with a question. Who here loves to find a really good deal? I'm sure that if you have not raised your hand, I don't think you're showing the true colors. Everybody likes a really good deal. And we're always looking for a good deal. At least personally, I never like to pay anything full price. I'm always trying to find a coupon somewhere, a discount somewhere. I want to get the best price available. And sometimes even secondhand might be even better. But unfortunately, we don't always get the best deals. And sometimes we have some really bad ones. And then when we look back at those deals that we made in the past, and we start thinking, that was such a bad deal. I wish I could go back and undo what I did. If I could not make that trade, if I could not make that deal, it would be so much better. What are some of the worst deals in history of humanity? Can you look back a few thousand years? Can you think of anything that's like, this is a really bad deal? That list, I think, is pretty big. But I have two of them that stood out to me. One of them was Wayne's sale of Apple computer. So when Apple was founded, Wayne had 10% of the company. 12 days after the company was founded, he sold his stake of the company for $800. As of yesterday, if you have kept those 10%, do you know how much it would be worth today? $316 billion. A really bad deal. Hindsight is always 20/20, and you could go back and be like, what? If I had kept that, it would be much better today. There is another one that really stood out to me, and if you're familiar with the history of the United States, you're familiar with this one. This was the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. If you're familiar with the deal made here, David Sutherland, he describes it that at the time Napoleon thought it was a good deal, as it meant that he had some cash for warships. In retrospect, it enabled Thomas Jefferson to double the size of the U.S. So you can see there the previous size of the United States, and then after the Louisiana Purchase, how he almost pretty much doubled it. And it ended up being about 4 cents an acre. Talk about a really good deal for the U.S., but think of it from Napoleon's perspective. And I don't know if you understand the value, the geographical value of having that land. As you can see, Mississippi River goes right through it. And when it comes to transportation, there's nothing cheaper than send things through water. It's the cheapest form of transportation. Takes a little longer, but it's the cheapest. So now we have access to the Midlands of the U.S., where you can transport grain down the Mississippi River all the way to the coast, and then you can export that to all the other countries at a much cheaper rate than anybody else could spend on. It's an immense value until this day. So then looking back, it will tell Napoleon, man, that was not a great deal. What did you get? A few couple, maybe a few ships. That's it. And I'm sure there are many more bad deals in history. This is just a couple that caught my attention. But what about in the history of God's people? Can you think of any really bad deal? There were 4 that I'm going to list today for you here, and I'm sure you're going to be very familiar with them. The first one, before I proceed, I want to call them compromises. I'm going to go a little deeper into why we are saying that deals or compromises are deals, but I want you to bear with me. Can you think of who those two people are? New Testament, Ananias and Sapphira. They were compromising in their word for the sake of influence, for the sake of not losing the little money that they would gather from it. There's another person that I could say did a really bad deal, and that is King Saul. Little by little, his little compromises that he made through his life amounted to him losing his physical life and also his eternal life. Another person that you could also argue had a really bad deal in his life, that was Samson. He lost his physical life, had to deal with so many problems, but thankfully, at the end of his life, he was able to turn around. But arguably, I think the next one is the worst one in the history of the God's people. Can you guess? I want you to go farther back. Let's go all the way to the beginning. Adam and Eve. It was one fruit. And guess what? The whole humanity is suffering for one bite. I don't think I can think of any worse deal or of any worse compromise. And then a question for you this morning, for us this morning to discuss is, what made all these people compromise? What do you think was the reason why they came to those decisions that they made? What makes a person compromise? I came up with at least two. There are many more, but there's at least two main ones that we want to cover here this morning. First one is influence and peer pressure. You know, we may think that we're not affected, that we're unspotted by the people around us. We may think that as long as what we're doing is right, we're going to be okay. But many times our silence might be speaking much louder than our actions. You know, we may think that because of the first few encounters, we may have received comments on how different we are. You know, you find new friends at school, at work, elsewhere, and they compliment on how well you're dressed, on how well you talk, how well you don't have bad language in your speech, how you behave properly, how you're honest and honorable. And then with these thoughts in our minds, we think, oh, we're going to be fine. At least they recognize that I am different. And we may reassure ourselves, you know, it's going to be all right. We're not realizing that the striking truth is that people's behavior affects us, whether we like to believe it or not. If we continue, their behavior will affect us. And sometimes we don't realize that what stood out as a different thing between us and them in the beginning might not be as different as time goes on. You know, by close association, we become changed. There's a famous verse that we always bring it up when we're talking about associations and influences, and it is Amos 3, verse 3. Can two walk together unless they are agreed? This is a question, but what is the answer to that question? can two people that have different ideas walk together? And what we mean by walking together is not just walking together in the street, it's by going on with our lives together. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 14 and 15, usually we use for people that are getting married or looking for a spouse. And we always use this verse, especially the first part. Do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. And then we usually stop here. Don't be together with those that don't believe the same thing you do. And then there are many reasons why you don't want to do that. First of all, if we are together with someone that does not believe the same way you do, when it comes to having children, when it comes to making decisions, big decisions in life, which way are you going to go? Come Saturday morning, you believe you want to go to church, but your spouse does not. And then you have 2 children. Who do you think they're going to go? Many times we don't think of those circumstances when we're thinking about marry someone or being with someone, is that those little decisions throughout our daily lives are going to be much harder to be made. But I wanted to continue this verse. For what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness? And what communion has light with darkness? We were talking about light in the lesson this week. And it became quite clear that they could not be combined together. Once you're in darkness, you don't want to be around light. And he continues, and what accord has Christ with Belial? And what part has a believer with an unbeliever? How can someone that wants to do the right thing stay around someone that does not want to do the right thing? I have mentioned before many times, imagine at work, you believe certain thing needs to be a certain way, and you have good reasons for it. There is standards that need to be followed. But there's that little coworker around you that, you know what, no, it's okay. Don't worry about it. We're just going to go through it. And now you have to make a decision. Am I going to stay firm and maybe be put aside and be always looked at the one that always wants to do the right thing? Or do we want to, stay firm? When I find myself frequently choosing to spend personal time with those that don't share the same values, could it be that I'm changing? If I find myself constantly spending time with people that don't share the same values that we do, or that you do, could it be that I'm actually not that different? I always hear these words, I'm doing missionary work. I'm witnessing. Or, Christ behaved and he stayed with the sinners. But there's a big difference between what Christ was doing with sinners and sometimes what we do with people that don't believe the same way we do. Christ was not there sinning with them, nor was he just absorbing them sinning. I understand every circumstance is different, but I want us to carefully analyze the real reason why we do certain things. And then a question for us is, could it be that I'm compromising? Could it be that I'm slowly lowering my standards? Could it be that I'm slowly become like everybody else? Those are important questions that we ought to ask ourselves when it comes to our behavior, when it comes to especially to compromise. The other reason why people compromise that I mentioned in the beginning is misplaced value. And then we will read Matthew 16, 25 and 26. And we'll talk about this very important reason why we compromise. It reads, "For whoever desires to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his souls?" I mentioned before, when we're talking about bad deals, I mentioned compromise. And the point this morning is that when we compromise, we're making a trade. Whether we realize it or not, every time we compromise, we're making a deal. We're either making a good deal or a bad deal. I'm always doing something in exchange for something else. Remember the 4 examples in the Bible that we brought this morning? What was the first one? Ananias and Sapphira. Why was the reason that they compromised? What was more important to them? The money. And let's also remember the influence. Because at that time, it was when everybody was giving up everything they had to share with the new believers. And you make a public declaration that you're going to sell your house. You're going to give it to the poor. You're going to give it to new people. What's going to happen to your influence? If you have to come forward again and say, you know what, we're actually not doing that. We're actually not giving up everything. We're keeping part of it. Now you're afraid of what people are going to think of you. The next one was King Saul. Why did he compromise? Who did he care the most? Did he care about doing the right thing, or did he care about the approval of the people? You have to understand, that man was really bothered by the fact that David had a better recognition from people than himself. Remember when they killed thousands and everybody was singing how David killed a lot more than him? Probably got stuck in his head. I need to get on the side of the people. Otherwise, what kind of king am I? If people don't like me, what kind of king am I? Now, when it came to making decisions, who did he use as a guide? The people's opinion. He made an exchange. I prefer the value of people's opinion than the value of doing what's right. There's always that trade-off that you make when we compromise. The third one was Samson. What was the thing that he valued the most? His relationships. It was more important to him the desires of the flesh. He could have those things with anybody else, but specifically with those that did not believe the same way he did. And we know the consequences. He had exchanged that for his own life. And much of an influence that he could have had with the people of God. And then the last one, what did Adam and Eve exchange? The tasting of a fruit for this whole ordeal that we have to deal with now, which is sin. There's always a trade-off when we compromise. We're either losing something or we're gaining something. The worst deal happens every time we compromise. When it comes to compromising principles, it's never a good deal. We attach more value to the things of this life, to our life, physical life here, than to the things that are promised to us. What is 70, 80 years compared to eternity? You know, sometimes you compare, we make little deals here and there. We spend so much time, trying to save a few bucks here and there. Maybe $10, maybe 50, maybe a few hundred, maybe 1,000, maybe thousands. We put so much value into those little details. But are we realizing that our decisions in our day-to-day life are actually, in regards to value, much more than just a few thousand? If it was given to you the option to buy eternity, how much would you give? That's essentially what the question is. If eternity is presented to us, how much would you give? It's going to depend now on how much you value what you have. Up until now, we talk about bad deals and what can lead to bad deals. But I don't want to stop here, because if we stop here, you're not going to be encouraged. All you heard about Hudson speaking was bad deals and what can cause bad deals. But I want to share with you something incredible. I'm talking the greatest deals ever made. Who do you think in the history of this earth history made one of the best deals ever? I'm talking one of the best ones. This man's life is always an inspiration for us. And we look back, but I want us to go a little deeper into his life and why he made these decisions. First one is Joseph. I want you to put yourself in his position. It's very easy for us to just read the story. It's like, oh yeah, Joseph ran away and eventually he came back and he was much better than before, and then yeah, of course that was a good deal. But when you go back to when he made the decision, was that a good deal? I want to read the context here for us to have an idea of the thinking that goes through his mind. I wanted to remind us ourselves of Joseph's commitment to God and how he always had before his mind, is God going to be honored by my action now? In Genesis 39, verses 7 through 9, and it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, look, my master does not know what is with me in this house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. And I want us to consider this question that he asks. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? This question is a question that we are to ask ourselves every time we're making big decisions in our life. Not so much the big ones, but especially the small ones. Am I sinning against God? I want you to put yourself in the circumstance. Look, you were slaved. You were sold by your brothers. You finally made it back. Think about years of suffering. You finally have a good position. You have a respectable position. People respect you. You have everything that you ever wanted or needed. And now you have the option, look, if I do what I need to do right now, I am going to lose everything. And then we usually say the things that come to our minds. The Lord has so far blessed me. Why is he going to take away from me now? But instead, Joseph makes one of the best decisions ever. He runs. He runs away. He traded that fleeting pleasure and position for the approval of God. And as you know the story, in return, he makes it much more than he ever had before that. But that commitment that Joseph made needs to be renewed continually. He was not basing his life or his decisions on the first commitment that he made after he was sold to Egypt. Remember, this question that he's asking every time. Am I going to sin against God? There's another person or another group of people that I want to share with you that you're very familiar with that also made one of the best deals ever. And that is Daniel and his friends. I also once again wanted to put yourself in the positions that they are. You already have a good position in the country that you come from. All of a sudden you are invaded, you're taken as prisoners, and now you put up with a choice. Do you stay firm to your principles or do you give in? Look, nobody knows what your principles are anyways. Did the people of Babylon knew what the principles that Daniel had? They were not familiar with it. They had to bring it up, the differences. And we're also very familiar with Daniel 1:8, that he purposed in his heart not to defile himself. But not just him, also his friends in Daniel 3:16 and 18. This is a very beautiful example of someone making the best deal. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar," this is after they've been put in a spot. You guys are now bowing down to the statue. What's up? They said, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter." If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fire furnace. And he will deliver us from your hand, O king. And I think this is one of the most important parts that we are to consider. But if not, if God does not deliver us, nothing changed. Let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. Regardless of the consequences, even if I don't receive anything back right now, I'm still going to stay firm. The story of Daniel and his friends doesn't stop here. Daniel, much later, was put on another trial, another difficulty. Now, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, the writing that anybody that worships but the king Nebuchadnezzar is going to be killed. He went home, and in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since the early days. Would I make the same decision that he made? Many times we want to avoid conflicts, we want to avoid difficulties. But let's remember here, he knew the decree was signed. He knew that if he did what he was planning to do, if he did what he always did, he would be in trouble. Many times we excuse ourselves, okay, I don't want to bring any trouble. I'm just going to stay quiet. He could have prayed with the windows closed. Could he? Would he still be praying? Yeah, he could have prayed anywhere else. But why did he still pray the same way that he always did? What would he be doing if he prayed with the windows closed? He would be compromising. Maybe that would be the beginning of his downfall. That we could look back and say, look, this is the place where Daniel really took a turn. But instead, regardless of the consequences, he still made the same decision. I'm going to keep doing what I always did. As we hear the news, as we hear the things going on in the world, as we compare with prophecy, we are reminded that, things are coming closer to an end. And we hear stories of our brethren in different countries being persecuted, suffering. We hear about them making tough choices, making tough decisions. And then the thought crosses our mind, what if I was in that place? what would I be doing in the same position? Am I ready to sacrifice my life for that? And I want you to remember Daniel's experience. He kept doing what he always did. He did not compromise. Well, he's here, if you had to go to war, at least don't work on Sabbath, or at least don't shoot. But maybe if I just carry the gun, I'll be all right. What would that be? A little compromise that we make here and there. These are real life examples. And people that made the best deals, and we know the end of it. A deal not to surrender no matter the consequences, in favor of God's approval instead of the temporal blessings. They chose life eternal, whether they lost social life or physical life. And I'm going to close with the verse that we opened this morning in Romans 12:2. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. And I want to leave you with a question this morning. What deals are you making today? If someone is going to review your life in the future, are they going to be able to say, that person made one of the best deals in a lifetime? Or are they going to say, that person made one of the worst choices in their lifetime? I want us to consider these questions every time we make decisions in life. Lord, am I doing your will or am I doing my will? I want this to be a good deal. May the Lord help us. Amen?